We want to start off with a reminder that we are not doctors. Before you make any changes or try something new, always consult with your doctor and medical team first. Chronic illness can vary from patient to patient, so it's always best to consult with your own doctor for what is best for you.
Hello, welcome to IBD Determined. I'm your host, Mason Harvey, and I have Crohn's disease, and I speak from the role of a patient.
And I'm Michelle Harvey. I'm Mason's mom, and I speak from the role of a caregiver. So, which all of you are probably very familiar with at this
Yes.
point.
If you have
So-
watched this show from the first episode, there's a good chance you know what we're going to say in the beginning.
Yeah, and you deserve a very special award for
You
doing that.
stuck around this long?
Yeah.
Say that in the comments. Were you here for the first video?
Yeah.
You're an original?
We're like, actually, so we're season 2, episode 5, but it's actually like the 30th episode
Wow.
that we have filmed. So 30 consecutive weeks
Woohoo!
of talking about IBD. And we have plenty more to talk about.
Yeah,
too.
we do. That deserves a reward, though.
Yeah, it is. It hasn't been too bad.
No,
So, and
it's actually fun.
today's topic is
Diet.
It's diet.
Should be
Thank you
fun.
for just jumping into that. But I was going to say it's one that kind of been hesitant to talk about because I know it's such a sensitive topic and it's people who are totally pro diet. Other people are kind of,
There's a lot of controversy between them.
yeah, let's just say that there really is. And so I don't want to have this podcast be anything that offends anyone who's on either side of this, but I think it's something that's important to discuss because yes. And the reason I think it's important is I had talked within the group. I'd asked people what are some of the most like worst things people have said, the most annoying things people say to you. And the overwhelming response was diet. And we have here, we're not going to read all of them, but we have like 2 or 3 pages of individuals that have just one sentence of things that have been said to them about diet and IBD.
A lot of people left a comment.
We can't read through all of them.
No,
but
we're not going to get to all of them.
Yeah.
But we'll read a few.
We will. And what that tells me is there's a lot of people that hear this all the time. And so there must be a lot of information out there that does suggest that diet can control IBD. And that could have something to do with also the confusion with IBS. I think there could be something in there too. And we'll go and put it up, but you're welcome to watch our IBS is not IBD episode. So you can learn all about why that is not the same thing. And some people claim that they can put themselves into remission solely with diet, and others change their diet and there are no effects. They do not benefit from it. And so I think that's actually interesting in itself is how could someone with the same disease have such polar opposite responses?
Like we've said, Crohn's is different for everyone, but to have your disease controlled by eating something and then someone has to be on a ton of different pills or medications and shots and infusions to help control their disease.
And have
really
surgeries.
Interesting how that can vary so much.
I've been looking this up. From the University Hospitals, they state that IBD is not caused nor can it be cured by what you eat. So I think this is really important what I'm about to read because people out there who are like, no, it can. Like, hold on, let me finish. They say doctors and dietitians agree, however, that food may play some role in the underlying inflammatory process that causes IBD symptoms. So certain foods may aggravate symptoms while others may calm them and promote healing.
Is in that little paragraph, whatever you want to call it, like she read, it doesn't say that food can cure it. It can lead to a flare potentially, but you can't cause Crohn's or you can't cure Crohn's with food.
Right. So it may aggravate or help symptoms, basically symptoms, which is not the actual Crohn's disease. It's the symptoms produced by the disease.
Basically, it's just putting a Band-Aid over the actual problem.
It's not solving it, but it could help. So I think that's what's important for people to understand is that difference that diet is not going to cause it. It's not going to cure it, but it may help some of your symptoms. And so I think that's where some of the confusion lies is some people think that if they're on, and we'll go into this in another episode. I'm not going to go into it here, but there are a bunch of different diets for IBD, a bunch of different suggestions. I mean, you've heard a lot of them too.
When we're in the hospital, I heard a lot of different
Yeah,
diets.
but none of them were suggested alone. It was suggested in tandem
with
biologics. So that's what's
or
important.
medications.
Yeah, this was not something where it's like just this alone. It was given as like an extra option. But we'll get into that in another episode because there's too many to go over here, and that's kind of not our focus.
Stay tuned for the potential next episode.
But before we go further, I think it's important to say, because even we're basically an online source, we're someone you guys listen to, but I think the most important resource you could use and trust is your own doctor. So it's important to know, like, we don't have the answers. There's a lot of sources online that will give you the answers you're looking for. So if you want to find something that says diet will solve it, you'll find it. And if you want something that says it will not, you'll find it.
There's responses to both sides.
Yes.
Depending on what you want to find, because they want you to visit your site. And if they tell you the information that you want to hear, you're most likely going to visit that site over a site.
And maybe buy whatever they're selling.
Yeah.
And if you feel like your doctor is not giving you the correct information, get a second opinion. But before you just listen to some doctor off the internet, and instead of your own, have that conversation with your doctor and maybe look at there's a deeper problem here if you don't have that trust and don't think your doctor is doing right for you. So make sure you know your options too and advocate for yourself. That's very important. These are the comments that kind of sparked this whole podcast and made us go, wow, okay.
I'll read the first one. Yeah. The first one on this long list is, if you just change your diet, ...
Yeah. And someone else said, my mother had Crohn's. She healed it with diet and never had it again. And these are not Crohn's. This is what, just to be clear, this is what Crohn's patients are being told. So like if they say, yeah, I have Crohn's disease, these are the responses they're getting. So this isn't a Crohn's patient saying this themselves. This is the responses they're getting. So that's important to know. Yeah. Another one says they got blamed, saying, oh, his diet is the cause. So putting the blame onto
what he's eating,
not the disease.
Born with the disease. Well, at least we think. We still don't know what causes Crohn's.
Exactly.
It could be something that has to do genetically with DNA when you're born, or something like that.
Because there's a whole argument about it being, if it was just caused by what we eat or environment, it would be interesting why some people are 40 years old when they get this. Some people are 30, some people are 70, and some people are 11, some people are 2. Anyways, just something to think about. So another one said, oh, I have celiac too. Cutting gluten is hard, but she'll feel so much better. That was advice given to a parent to give for their child. Celiac is not the same thing as Crohn's disease.
Yes, it's not the same as IBD.
Right.
Celiac is not the same as IBD.
Right. It's important to know.
They're all different.
You can have IBD and be celiac. Yeah. You can have IBD and have IBS, but not the same thing.
The same thing.
Right.
There's a reason they have different names.
Right. Different things, different causes. So anyways, that's not helpful.
Read this next one.
All right.
Have you tried going gluten-free? And there's side-eye emojis.
Yeah, I like those. Yeah, they added the side-eye emojis. And gluten-free is something that's always suggested, but
it's not a cure.
No, and it doesn't.
Potential it will work, but
other people may have good results by cutting out gluten, but it's important to remember not everybody will. There's no one size fits all diet. There's nothing. Yeah, there's no cure all that one person has figured out. One set of friends said she used to have IBD in college and eating changed her and she's fine now.
I don't think that was IBD.
I don't think it could be IBD. And it minimizes the disease so much when people do this. Like, this frustrates me because I feel like they act like it's just a food disease. Like, oh, okay, that's all it is.
I mean, there might be a chance that might work on a few select people, but if that was really the case and you could cure IBD with food, wouldn't that be such a it's like
it'd be a miracle.
Miracle.
So another one, oh, you had a flare up. What did you eat? So again, blaming that
food.
Sometimes you have different triggers. Sometimes you don't realize something's a trigger till you try it. And then you're like, oh, that didn't agree with me.
This next one is a pretty big one.
One is, the worst is to me is when people tell me just to change my diet and that I don't need my meds. So that's great coming from someone who doesn't have IBD, isn't a doctor, but they can just tell you to just do all that. And
someone who their lives depend on these medications that they have to take every day or every week or every month.
Right.
I don't think they like hearing that.
Right. So there's many more. I was told it could be cured by diet. I've been told this by many family members. I just need to eat differently.
I'll pick one that I want to read next. It's not the
Okay,
next one, but it's one that
go
I
ahead.
want to read. I once received a three-day long lecture from a family member over a holiday about how going keto would fix it.
Yeah. They think that it's like a food thing. And it's like, ah, my
It's
gosh.
not. Nope.
So So we're going to go now to discuss like our thoughts on diet. And again, these are just our thoughts based on our experience. I want to be very clear because I want to be fair to anybody listening. I know you may have a different experience, and that's what is really important to remember. I want you to realize if you are listening and don't have this experience like Mason does, to recognize that there are differences.
Differences
So
between every person who has
yeah.
Crohn's
So I think that's
or any
important to look at
disease.
too, not just to say, oh, they're wrong or oh, they're right. It's important to acknowledge that this is can be very individual how this is handled. Because there's a few different ways to look at it. If you're using diet solely for remission, like that's your only thing you're doing is changing your diet, that's one thing. Then there's people that use like diet with treatments, kind of what we're talking about, like when you did TPN and you are fed through the PIC
Pick
line, and
line.
then you did the
Yeah.
supplemental drinks only,
And then there's
but you were also on infliximab, Remicade at the time.
yeah.
So it wasn't alone, it
No, it
was
was working
coupled
in
and with
tandem.
steroids and with methotrexate at the same time. And then there's using biologics with no dietary changes, which
Which
is
is like
basically where you're at.
yeah. I'm just
So,
on biologics. I'm not really doing
yeah.
anything different with my diet. So I'm able to eat what I like and just kind of fix it with
Which is
medications.
which is lucky because Mason would suffer from, he could be malnourished even though he was eating, his body wasn't processing things correctly. Because those biologics, it's now processing the food in the correct way and his body's much healthier. And he's also hungrier. So he has an appetite.
Is in 2020. I mean, I had to eat, but because I was in flares a lot
Yeah.
after the hospital and in the hospital, I wasn't really that hungry. But now I'm hungry because we got that flare under control and
Yeah.
woohoo!
So, because like, I guess what we're saying too is like, if he didn't get that under control, like he was saying, he wasn't hungry. So, just doing dietary changes,
Would
he
be
would have
hard.
been no appetite. It would have been really hard to encourage him and to eat things that were restrictive. Like, if you're on a certain diet, you can only eat this right now and this. And if he was already not hungry, could you imagine being told, like,
Oh, you can have that,
yeah,
but you could have this, which doesn't sound good to you
right.
at all.
So there's that whole situation too, which I know some parents listening you can relate to. I also think the other thing with diet is people just wish it was that simple, right? Like how easy would that be if you didn't have to do all the biologics? You didn't have to pay for it. You didn't have to fight insurance. You didn't have to go to the hospital.
You could just
And
stop eating bread and
yeah,
boom, you're good.
and it was like your body is healed. I think that
Obviously, there's a little bit more than that, but
right. And I mean, yeah, it's not like we're saying sarcastically, but that's kind of like an example of like, we wish it
it was like
was
that.
that simple. And if it is that simple for you, I cannot see how it's the same disease, or maybe it's the same disease, but maybe it operates differently in you. I think that a lot of times people are also scared of biologics, and it is a
Who isn't
scary
afraid
thing.
of a needle?
No, and it's so I think like so again, that's actually a good point. From a patient, from a child or teen, the fear is probably of the infusion, of the
Yeah.
injection, of right, like that process.
So when I first went to the hospital, I was like, oh, because they were giving me an IV, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. This is horrible. I'd rather do
Mhm.
anything else than get this IV. But after getting it for like 3 years, I'm used to it now. But when I
Yeah.
was first getting it, I'm like, oh, I don't want that at all. I don't want to get an IV. I was afraid of shots. I don't want to get a shot, and I definitely don't want to get an IV because
Yeah.
it stays there.
And I think from a caregiver, like a parent perspective, our fear was more of what are we putting into our kids' bodies
Mhm.
here? Like, I'm looking at this is crazy stuff.
I've never heard of Remicade. What is Remicade
Yeah.
again?
So
You're using it on him now?
you
Okay.
Google it, you look it up, and you're like, oh my
Oh,
gosh. So it is very scary. And even as an adult, it would be a daunting thing. And so I just think it's important to discuss with your doctor and ask the questions and find out, is it more of a risk to have an uncontrolled disease than the biologic? What are you more afraid of, I guess? And For us, clearly, we didn't want an uncontrolled disease because that only leads in one direction and it's
That
not a
wouldn't be
good one.
good
So you want to do whatever you can to
to
make your
get that
body
disease
healthy.
under control.
And so the other thing, like I think a lot of people think that biologics is big or biologics are big business and there's a lot of money to be made, which there is. That it is, it that we've said before, we're very open about it. It's like $28,000 for an injection from Stellara, and those for him are every 4 weeks. And then for like the Entyvio infusion with the hospital stay and the way they administer it as like a chemo, it's like 34,000 a treatment. So
It's an interesting idea. If it was all big business and it was just money
Mhm.
and they didn't do anything, why would some biologics not work and then some would?
Right. It's not like, yeah, it's not like they're all making the same product and just trying to sell it
Yeah.
to you and raise the price, or they're very different. That's the other thing. When we have a biologics episode, we can post that up at the top of the screen for you guys. But we have discussed this whole thing on how biologics work, and they're very different. So, but there's always a race to probably find the next treatment because there is such money in it. So we do understand that. And at the same time, though, I think that the diet industry is also big business. I think a lot of people are willing to spend money on supplements and order them from an online doctor that maybe is a really good spokesperson and really sells something. And that it doesn't mean that they're not going to work for you. Again, everyone is different with this and people find their own way. But
These are businesses still, they're trying to make money.
it's still trying to make money. So if you put the two next to each other, there's still profit to be made,
It's
you
something
know.
good to remember is even though these injections or other things are so expensive, nothing is as priceless as the gift of life.
Yeah.
So even if you're paying $25,000, is that it's worth it
Yeah.
that you get to enjoy your life and have a good life.
Right. And I think that's a great another podcast to talk about.
The best part is
It's another
you only have to pay a fraction of that. Well, we do because we
yeah.
have
Maybe
insurance.
let us know if you think that'd be interesting in a podcast, like advice, because we know we have different programs to help assist and pay for these. So
Yeah, what are some different programs?
yeah, so if that's something, maybe that's, let us know. And otherwise, I think that'd be an interesting podcast
Yeah.
too, to kind of help everybody.
We got two new podcast ideas for
Yeah,
this
we do. We'll,
episode.
we'll have to just rewatch so we don't forget because I'm
Yes.
not taking notes. So I think it's important, like we said, that there are triggers and that can help you, but they're not necessarily going to cure Crohn's. And so maybe you did find a diet, maybe you did find a supplement that not helps those triggers and helps you not flare, which is great. But it's just important to remember, even with biologics, neither of these things,
Are gonna
neither is curing the
whether you're
disease.
paying for a 25,000 shot or you're just kind of excluding a certain type of food out of your diet, it's not curing it. It's just a
Right.
band-aid that is being put over the disease.
Right.
It's not going to cure it, but it's going to make you feel better.
Right. And I think there's several band-aids. So that's why I think there's a combinations of things that work. And I think that, until we actually get to the root cause of it and they can find a treatment or a cure even better for this. And I think the other thing that is frustrating when people discuss diet is it's really important to be careful when you tell someone to change their treatment to your own. I think it's important, like, to share your experience, kind of like what we do, but also realize that ultimately you need to find a treatment that will work for you. Like, just
It's
because,
different for everyone.
like, Mason's on Stellara and
Yeah.
Entyvio.
Maybe Stellara doesn't work for you. Maybe
Right.
Remicade works for you. Remicade didn't work for me, but it
Right.
might work for you.
Right. I would never say, "Oh, get off those." Only thing that's gonna work is if you get on 2 biologics,
Yeah.
and it's Stellara and Entyvio, and I might now if people ask, I would say, "Well, this is what worked for Mason," and
But we're not
maybe
going to say, oh, make sure you get on this because these are the only two
right.
that work.
Because we have one of, his friends is on Remicade, and that has worked for her since the day she was diagnosed, and that has been her go-to. But if we just based Mason
Yeah.
on her, he'd be very ill right now. So so that's just why it's important to remember that your answer may not be somebody else's. It's good to maybe discuss and say, "Hey, this is what worked for me," but to not just think there is one answer.
Yeah.
And science is always changing. And so keep talking to your doctors, keep researching and find out how things are changing. And in the reality of it all, too, diet does play a role, but in all aspects of life, not just someone with IBD. I think it can be argued, even
It's important
without
for
it,
everyone.
diet is important. Having a healthy, balanced diet is important. And so there is something to that. Obviously, a body is healthier when you are treating it healthier with what you're feeding it. And some people, even without IBD, a regular person might get heartburn from eating something. Another person may get a stomach upset from eating something else. And you know it.
Yeah.
Like
You
you're,
can't eat pizza for 5 days straight. It's the only thing you eat. You gotta
yeah.
have pizza one for lunch, then you gotta have something different for dinner, then you have something different the next day. It can't be all the same.
Right. It does make sense how with IBD, just like a normal person without IBD, it would have triggers too. And so it's just important to identify those triggers and just remember that diet affects everybody. So it does matter. Diet does play a role, I think, in IBD because it plays a role in anybody's lives. I think that's important to remember. But I think it's just upsetting when there's the assumption that diet is the only thing that affects IBD. And I think it just puts too much blame on the person. Like, you
Like
could
they're
fix
being blamed for
this.
what they're eating.
Right. Like, why aren't you fixing it? Why don't you just do this? And it's like, you don't know. Maybe this person has tried. Maybe they have. And it isn't fair to blame the person. And it's the disease. And unless somebody has a known trigger and they purposely eat that trigger food that makes them sick, and I think honestly, that's different if it's something like that. But for the most part, most people with IBD know their triggers and they are not going to purposely eat something they do
You just don't
not
wanna
want that
feel like that.
pain. No, it's painful, it's bad, like, they're not gonna want to risk that. So, I think more times when you're acting like somebody doesn't know, it feels like, okay, most people would not do that with this disease.
'Cause
And
if you don't have the disease, it's like, well, do you know what you're talking about? Because
mhm,
I'm the one with the disease, and I should know my disease better than someone who doesn't have this disease
yeah,
knows.
yeah. I pulled another article, and there's a Dr. James Lewis. It was from an article in Gastroenterology and Hepatology. And I think he put it, I took what he said, because this is something that I really, I think is important to hear from. And he said, this was when he was asked if dietary modification alone can induce and retain IBD remission. So just a diet, not anything else. And he says there are some patients who are adequately managed with one medication, while others require multiple medications, which is true. In the future, there will likely be a subpopulation of patients with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis whose inflammation can be controlled with a therapeutic diet. For other patients, dietary manipulation may be made through therapy that can allow them to use less immunosuppression and still remain in remission. And then finally, as with all medical therapies, there will almost certainly be a subset of the population in which dietary therapy is completely ineffective. That's kind of what we've always thought, is that you get this diagnosis, but is there different subpopulations within that? Is there different subsets of Crohn's disease where certain people can change, really, when they say, I can just change my diet and it works? Because someone like you, that is not going to work. And why does one person need one biologic every 8 weeks and someone like you
Needs
needs
2
two
every
every 4
4
weeks?
weeks.
And so it really just does seem like this disease needs to be attacked with how it's personally attacking the person. They need to figure out why it is doing that.
Why is it different for everyone?
Yeah, so I just found that really interesting because it really does vary, and that's why it's not good to give one size fits all answers to this disease. When somebody says, "I have Crohn's," don't tell them, "Yeah, you can just cure it." You, no,
Well, that worked for you, didn't work for me.
right. Important to remember. We did have a dietitian for Mason who was an IBD dietitian, and she did give us guidance. So we did have certain flare diets, things we tried when Mason was in a flare, but that was under guidance. That wasn't me going online asking another parent what they give their child and me doing that. That would not be safe. So it is very important to remember, like, if you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. But when you're caregiving for a child, it is very important to work side by side with
With
the
the doctor.
doctor. Be very careful giving dietary advice to other parents. And if you are an adult, yeah, you can make your own decisions, but I would recommend, even if you just want to go diet alone, continue to get lab draws, continue to check in with your doctor,
Make sure
continue to
everything's
get
okay.
colonoscopies. Right.
Yeah.
Like Mason said, to make sure everything's okay.
Because if just one thing goes out of control, that could
It's
throw you into an entire train wreck or
yeah,
fire.
right. It's important no matter what you decide to be monitored by a doctor and continue to do those lab draws and continue to do your colonoscopies and endoscopies and things like that, MRIs and all that. So with this disease, it can turn on you very quickly. And so our final thoughts here, don't put others down for their choices. If, on either side. I think if it's a safety issue and you feel you need to say something, that's one thing. But otherwise, if it's not hurting anybody and if somebody like don't
If
be
it's
rude.
dangerous for that person, give them a warning. But if it's not your problem and they're not complaining about anything,
Right.
you don't need to complain back.
Right,
Like just saying,
especially if you don't know enough about it, especially
yeah,
if you're sharing a story that you heard down the line and you have no idea if it was true,
if you don't
and
have anything nice to say, don't say it.
it's
If you
just
don't know
easy.
anything about something, don't say it.
Right, and ask questions like we always say. Instead, ask about
Mhm.
their symptoms, ask about
Like,
their
oh, what are you
IBD.
going through?
Right,
What do you have to do to
and
treat your
instead of saying you
disease?
need to change your diet, you could say, "So do you use medication, diet? How do you do it?" Like, learn. Take it as an opportunity to learn, and it's okay to ask those questions, but not to tell somebody who is fighting this disease because they're the last person who wants to hear from you who does not have it. And the other thing is we went to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. It is always a great resource, guys. This is, one of our favorite places. We love our local chapter is fantastic. We work closely with them. But you're welcome to go on their website. And I had just looked up on there what they had on diet. And one of the things they have is the myth is that IBD is caused by foods you eat. That is a myth. The fact is, IBD is not caused by what you eat. Although certain foods can make symptoms worse for patients, IBD is not caused by a specific food or diet. And then there's a link you can also click on to learn more about that. But that's something that's very important is that it's not caused by a specific food or a diet.
It's just awoken.
Yeah.
Flare.
You wake it up. Yeah, you flare.
You wake up the
Yeah.
beast.
And we're working on something too over here. We have another project we're working on to help you guys. We're always trying to find ways to use our situation to help others and in ways we can because we're not doctors or
No,
scientists. So we try to find other ways to help out. And so we're coming up with a few things that can help with finding triggers and things like that. So that's in the
yay, that's
works.
something to look forward to.
Yeah. And then, there is another thing from the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation that we found. It says, like, while researchers are working to understand more about how various foods, such as those that are ultra processed, like,
Potato chips, sodas, candy,
yeah,
crackers.
or have added sugars, emulsifiers, and other additives, may contribute to the underlying inflammation IBD, but there's currently no direct evidence to suggest that specific foods cause inflammation. There could be something that could change in the future when you're listening to this.
Something interesting to think about. Scientists have figured out a bunch of different things, like electric cars, things like that, and they still don't know much about Crohn's disease. That just shows how new it is,
Yeah.
and it's growing fast.
Yeah, it really is. There are certain foods that may lead to unpleasant symptoms, even if they're not causing inflammation. So maybe that's something important to differentiate. I think listen, if you guys listening, it may lead to unpleasant symptoms, but not actual inflammation. But I think it could be confusing to you because you're like, is this a flare or is this something I ate?
Yeah,
And so I think that is confusing because we don't know enough about that.
and depending on a symptom, maybe obviously they don't know this yet, but hypothesis, maybe if a symptom is too bad, or if a symptom caused by food that didn't directly cause a flare, if a symptom gets too bad, that symptom itself could maybe cause something that could cause a flare.
Yeah.
So the food doesn't cause a flare, the food causes a symptom, and that symptom that gets worse causes a flare.
Right. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good hypothesis. Sounds good to me.
All we need is the proof.
Yeah. Paying attention to your diet may help you reduce symptoms. So maybe not inflammation, but symptoms. Many people may worry that they could have done something differently to avoid developing IBD, which is what people blame a lot
Mhm.
of people for. But it says, remember, diet likely represents only a small piece
And
of
the
the
puzzle.
puzzle. So kind of like we're saying, there's a big picture and there's multiple band-aids. And so all these little different band-aids are put on this disease because nobody really knows what causes it. Nobody knows how to cure it. So it's like you just keep putting different band-aids on. And these different band-aids are going to be things like diet and biologics and other types of medications and treatments. And so yeah, it's a part of it. Diet is important because it plays a role, I think. But I think that was a really I really was interested when I read that, wanted to include that for you guys. So hopefully you found that, as exciting as I
I found that interesting.
it is, right? I think it is. It helps explain it because sometimes we can just talk and I can babble and go on and I can talk in a circle and be like, I don't know if I'm getting this out right what I want to say. So I love when I find something where I'm like, oh, this is organized and written so well. And the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation does such a good job of
Shout out to the
that.
Crohn's and Colitis Foundation.
Yeah, thank you guys
Yes.
because it's very helpful. And so I like to do this so I can show you guys listening that there are easy reads that you can find things that will explain things in a way that, hey, that makes sense. We're going to kind of close this out. Biologics are necessary. That's
Definitely.
yes. And dietary changes didn't make a difference. This is our
Hmm. Is it for
situation.
us?
Right. This is for us. And you out there may have a very different experience, and that's okay too. But just like we shouldn't say this is the only way to do it,
It's
make
different for
sure
everyone.
you're not saying that. But I think it's important to have healthy discussions, healthy conversation, help each
Asking
other out,
questions.
ask those questions and say, if you are doing diet only, maybe there's questions I would love to ask you. And if you are curious about biologics, we would be happy to answer those because we can. I can't speak from something I haven't experienced. He can't speak from something he hasn't. And so we rely on his doctors for the treatment and they have not steered us wrong. They've done a great job. And if I felt like anything was not being done to the best for Mason, we would have looked for a second opinion. But I definitely wouldn't go online and just change his treatment
No.
ever because somebody online said something worked or a person I meet in passing. So just important to remember, consult with your doctors. And in our case too, we tried to identify food triggers. We kept a food log. We tracked everything he ate, everything he drank,
And it
and
didn't really seem to make a difference.
it didn't. So some of you out there though, it really will. And so I think it's important. I do want to say it is important to find those triggers.
Mhm.
Monitor it. And sometimes things may change. If all of a sudden you're not feeling well, maybe you have a new trigger food. And maybe, we've had to do that even with Mason. When he did flare, we were trying to figure out, wanted to look back and say, okay, what changed? Did he try something new that triggered something? And so it is important to continue to monitor diets, to look for those triggers. But sometimes certain foods will affect you and sometimes they won't, just like for anybody. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just important to consult with your doctors and to ask questions to each other and to not tell somebody to change their course of treatment because something worked for you. Offer that advice, offer your situation, but don't come down on them if they don't take that advice and if they don't change it because they're going to do what's best for them. And this disease
That's why.
it
It's
is.
not their fault that it doesn't work for them.
Yeah, it's important not to put the blame onto the patient. And so hopefully with more research, continue you guys working hard with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. The Take Steps, we'll be talking about that soon. That is starting. And so if you have a local chapter, we encourage you to reach out, join Take Steps, meet others out there with IBD and fundraise, raise money.
Help support this.
Yeah, so we can do research so we can find out if something is as simple as diet or if it's not or whatever. So we can just keep doing research and giving a life giving a life to these people that they deserve and keeping them healthy and happy. So that's about it. So with that, I would like to say you can follow us on Instagram at Team IB Determined to watch our daily lives, things we do, going to the hospital, health updates,
Going to
things like
fun
that.
places.
The Reggie Project.
Yes.
Yeah, we launched that. So if you guys listening would like to have your picture and your story put onto the Reggie Project, just go to Instagram at the Reggie Project, give us a message, send us a picture, and we're more than happy to share that and spread awareness for any health challenges, not just IBD. Okay. So
Be for
that's,
anyone.
yeah, that's the goal of this, is to raise awareness for what you're passionate about, or for, what's hurting you or a family member. Speak out about that. And you can also listen to our podcast on any podcast stations like Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever it's played. And
And if you like watching it, make sure to go to YouTube. And if you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to be notified every time we post a video, make sure to hit that bell icon.
yep. And
We've been getting comments.
yeah, we have, which is helpful and exciting. And we love hearing from you guys. And we're just going to keep doing this because this is a labor of love. This is our time off. Mason doesn't have school today,
Yes.
and I'm not working. So, but technically now we are working
Yeah.
because we're doing this.
Oh
So,
wow.
yeah. So
What
you
a
don't.
twist.
We do a lot of behind the scenes work. It's a full couple days of research and prep that go into these episodes.
Mhm.
Then we do this, and then we have to edit and put it up. So we really do this because we care. This is not something we make money from. It's just something that we want to provide that comfort,
And
and
help
that,
others.
yeah, and help others out there, and just be that voice that we needed when Mason was diagnosed. So I hope you guys find value in that and keep listening. So, and also we'll be talking about this next week. Mason's going to be on the news
Ooh.
most likely on Tuesday. Yeah, he's going to be working with the San Diego Blood Bank and Rady Children's Hospital to speak out on the need for blood donations. So, we'll be able to share more about that next week. So, stay tuned. We'll let you know how that goes.
Yes.
So, hopefully it's good.
Donate your blood.
So we're going to be working on that too. He gets to work on what he's going to speak about, and so I'm proud of him, and I'm sure it'll go well. I have
Most
have
likely.
confidence. Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. Have a great day.
We'll see you in the next video.
Yep. See you guys
Episode.
on the next episode and video.
Podcast.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye. We hope you will stick around, tune in, and reach out to us with your own journeys. We are excited to give you an inside view of what it takes to be a caregiver and what it's like to be a patient.
And most of all, we hope you'll maybe be able to play something you hear on here that might help you in your own life. Sometimes life changes, and it's all about how you handle the journey.